On with FEMA Region 4. Apologize for the late start. We were just trying to get some technical issues sorted out. We are going to be recording this webinar. If you don't want to be a part of that recording, you can feel free to drop if you want. First, I would just like to thank everybody that's been a part of this webinar today. Tracy and her team, our speakers today, all of our interpreters today. Thank you very much for being here. We really appreciate it. As you can see today, we're going to be talking improving tornado warning communication for deaf and hard of hearing, and blind and low vision audiences. We do have a lot of good speakers today, and I think I'm just going to pass it to them. Ms. Tracy, if I missed anything, let me know.
Hi, this is Jason. I'm a meteorologist and climatologist in the Department of Geography at the University of Alabama. So we're excited to present our research, education, and outreach efforts on this important topic. I want to briefly introduce my co-presenters. Jennifer Sari is with the National Weather Service Huntsville. She's the National Weather Service Deaf and Hard of Hearing Outreach Team Lead. She's been doing work in this area for over a decade, and we're going to see a lot of her efforts towards the end of the presentation. Darren Griffin is in the Department of Communication Studies at Alabama, and Darren is a CODA. He's a child of deaf adults, and this research would have been impossible without his insight and his knowledge. And we were talking about ways to combine our research, and we wanted to better serve this neglected population. And then we decided that we needed to bring in Kathleen Sherman Morris from Mississippi State University and her research efforts with weather risk perception with blind and low vision people in Mississippi. And then we got our NOAA Vortex Southeast grant. We were funded, we were excited. So we're going to present all of these aspects today. And we're going to start with Kathy's part of the research project with blind and low vision people in Mississippi.
All right, thank you, Jason. If we could go to the first slide. So as Jason mentioned, my part of the project dealt with participants who are legally blind. This included some people who had no usable vision, as well as some that had some usable vision. And it was people living in Alabama, Mississippi, and one person from Louisiana. We were targeting those two states specifically. We did two sets of interviews on the telephone. 25 were in the first part, 27 were in the second part. In the first round, we were mostly interested in this population, getting to know them a little bit better with respect to their needs for tornado warning communication. This included the sources they were using, if they were different from the cited population, what barriers they perceived as, hurting their chances to get warnings or to respond to them effectively, as well as just a better understanding of what we as warning communicators could do to serve this population better. In the second round, which occurred about a year later, we looked at an experimental type of warning. There's a group of people that are working on how to incorporate probabilistic forecast information into tornado warnings. So we were interested in how could this probabilistic information be translated into a text product so that people who would not have the ability to see a graphic or to see it as the designers intended, how they would understand that probabilistic information. So that was part two. So I'll touch on that one just a little bit. And before I show my results, I did want to acknowledge both the funding agency, NOAA, as well as I was able to collaborate with the National Research and Training Center on Blindness and Low Vision, which is housed here on the Mississippi State University campus. So if I could have the next slide, please. So one thing we asked people at the beginning of our interviews were, how do you know that you're under a tornado threat? What tells you that you need to pay attention to this and do something to make yourself safe? And what we found, and this is a thread that you'll see throughout several of my slides, that geographic description was so important. And then related to that, trajectory information. Often when you're talking about a tornado, you're talking about where it is, as well as where it's going and where it's expected to be at, at certain times, like 20 minutes, it'll be here. So that information was so important to not only this population, but to other populations that I've studied. They wanted to know, is it going to affect my neighborhood or the area that I am familiar with, that I live? Some of the other information wasn't cited quite as much, but like, how severe is it? Is there circulation? So maybe some keywords or some signal words that they might be listening to. And also safety information. Research, not done by me or by our team, but by others, has shown that it's not just important to get the message, but it's important to tell people what to do to make themselves safer. And a recent study found that even if they were given a sufficient warning message, if it didn't include protective action recommendations, people were not as likely to heed the warning and to take action. So next slide. So after we asked people how they knew they were under a threat, we asked them specifically what they liked and didn't like about the ways they were getting their current tornado warnings. And I guess I'll mention before I talk about this particular slide that we didn't see too many differences between our population of people who were legally blind and the sighted population, or the population at large, in other studies. Television was still an important factor, as well as mobile devices. And even though this was conducted around 2018, mobile devices were the most preferred source for this group. And that we're seeing that more with general population surveys as well. So what comments did they make about the source of the message? The most common was general oral quality, just general things about the message that made it harder for people who weren't able to see the message. So things like speaking too fast, or just not having a good enough richness of information provided orally, not being able to hear the message, or it just not being translated into sound, into words that are spoken at all. So those were some of the things. People had also a lot of comments about closed captioning and the crawl that you would see on the bottom of your television screen. So for people that were that had no usable vision, if the crawl wasn't spoken, it was of no use to them. Other comments were some things like they didn't know that they should be paying attention to this. Or another common comment was that because the crawl was very long, it was hard to keep up with the information that was being included. So next slide. Some comments made about the message in particular. The most common things about the message were, again, just the richness of the description, both the geographic description, how well the communicator was able to talk about the geographic areas being depicted, as well as just description in general. If you can think about this population not necessarily being able to see like a radar image, for example, or a polygon, they talked about things like the warning communicator talking about what, as you can see right here, or if you can look at this red area on your map, things like that, where someone that's not able to see the map is not able to follow what's going on. So both geographic description as well as just description of the image in general. So next slide. And then specific barriers that were mentioned. One of the most common was actually that the people had no safe place to go. This was 6 unique people out of the 25 that we interviewed. And this is something that in the Southeast, where we did our survey, some of these people lived in mobile homes. Some of them were not able to drive. I guess a lot of them were not able to drive, but they had no access to transportation to get to a safer place. And in the Southeast, a lot of our tornadoes occur during the nighttime. So they didn't necessarily feel comfortable calling somebody in the middle of the night to get them to a safer place. So this was a big issue for us. or for this population. Some of the other things just regarding with things that people couldn't see, they couldn't see the environmental cues that, you know, a lot of times people, even though we tell them not to go outside, some people still want to see the warning. So I'm not saying this is something we should encourage, but this was something that our participants said that, you know, was a factor for them. As well as the radar. They didn't feel like they had enough ability to see the radar as somebody who had full use of their sight. So those are some of the things that they brought up as far as barriers. And I could just have my last slide, or one more slide, to talk about part 2. So I said in part 2, we talked about probabilistic warning information. And there was some quantitative information taken in this part of the interviews. They did think that when we gave them more geographic information with the probabilities, it was more helpful and more dependable, though the results were not statistically significant with this increased information. They didn't intend to take shelter upon receiving the warning as high with the probabilistic information as with the current warning type. So I think this is still maybe a work in progress as far as turning it into text-based. And like I mentioned earlier, this was a number of years ago now, and there have been a lot of advances with the use of probabilistic warning information that isn't reflected in this study. The frequent response to probabilistic information was that they would keep listening and wait to take action. And my last slide. So what can we do or what can we recommend for communicating warnings to people who are legally blind? First of all, speed. Not speaking too fast is helpful because they don't have the same ability to see what you're talking about as you're speaking. The length of warning, especially if you're thinking about the crawl, might be important because it takes time to repeat some of those details. So if the warning information can be in shorter chunks, it will help with things like the crawl, text readers, things like that. And then geographic detail is probably one of the most important things that came out of this research. And I would make the analogy that if you are communicating warnings, you want to speak like a radio sportscaster. If you're thinking about like a sporting event where you're not physically there, you're just listening to them describe the detail. You want to be able to know what's going on with as much detail. And then finally, the use of colors. Approximately 8% of males have some type of color blindness. And there are websites out there that can help show you what your graphics might look like if you're communicating to an audience with color blindness. So this is just one example that you can plug your images into, and it'll show you. The first two are with 2 types of color blindness, and then the last one is what it would look like to someone without color blindness. So those are just some tips that I have, and I'm going to turn it over to Darren to talk about the other research.
Thank you, Kathy. I'll pause for a second to ensure they can get the pinning correctly and the visuals correctly. I wanted to start by saying thank you to the folks who are attending. My view just changed, so let me see. Okay. Thank you to those who've attended. Looks like we have a nice audience here, and that's something to be excited about because this project would not be possible without all the people who contributed and partnered with this project and the people who are participating in today's webinar, because this is applied research and the practicality of our findings are disseminating to folks like you who can apply those. So I wanted to start by first thanking a few people and our partners that actually made the research possible. Obviously, everyone on my team here who's participating was heavily involved. The Alabama Institute for the Deaf and Blind here in the state of Alabama was essential in helping us coordinate recruiting participants and coordinating interpreters and giving us valuable insights that contributed to the research and the findings that we're going to share with you today. The National Weather Service, obviously, and Jennifer Sari and all the great things that her and her team have done. It's been a real honor to work with her and learn a lot about weather. it's been a great pleasure to learn a lot about the enterprise that they're doing, and thank you for that work. Aaron Kuby is here today with us, and I'm going to pass it to him so he can share some of his insights as someone who contributed to some of the products that we were testing in the research. And then, of course, Noah, who's contributed heavily to bringing us here today and contributing to the research. So I'll go ahead and get into a little bit of the study that we did. Jason and we worked together in Alabama, and we conducted 28 interviews. As you can see, we had 20 participants who identified as deaf, 3 identified as hard of hearing, and we had 5 deaf-blind individuals participate in our research. We did interviews that averaged 40 minutes. Some went a little bit longer. People were more interested in weather than others. And for every one of the interviews, the participants were provided with research compensation that was commensurate with their time. And we had ASL qualified and certified ASL interpreters present at all of the interviews. So that way we were getting accurate language transcription and interpretation. So after we did these interviews, we transcribed and organized the information so that we could then create results and analyses of that information to share with you today. A second part of our research, actually in Tuscaloosa, we brought together 7 deaf and hard of hearing participants who were deaf professionals, and they came and we showed them various elements of split screens that we created to try to increase accessibility of weather messages. So one of the things that I wanted to share that's not necessarily on our slides is very important is when I talk to people about increasing information and accessibility of emergency information or weather information, the common person tends to respond and say, well, isn't that what captioning is for? And there's a twofold problem there. A lot of times we've learned from our participants that captioning is not readily available during emergencies. So that's the first problem. And the second problem is actually a language transcription or a language translation challenge, where American Sign Language is its own language grammatically that doesn't map or mirror to English one-on-one. When there are captions, a lot of times they're imperfect, so that doesn't help, right? So you'll be missing vocabulary and misspelled words. But generally, providing people with information in their own first language is going to be the most accessible and readily way to share that information. So that was really what you're going to see here is a move by our team to try to create some of those products. If you've been watching our research and some of this type of research you might have seen in other countries in the world, they're doing some of what we're trying to do. But to our knowledge, there's at the time of our research, there was very little accessible emergency communication happening. And I do know that there are some organizations in the United States who've made a lot of progress in the last few years. And some of those folks are likely in this webinar today. So I want to applaud them for their contributions and work providing accessible communication to the deaf and hard of hearing community. Next slide. So what I wanted to show you here was some of the early prototypes and production of what we produced to share with a focus group. And so on the left side of the screen, you'll see that we have a professional, certified, and qualified interpreter who was working with us to do a very early prototype of a split screen. And we actually created several versions of this. And if you look closely, you'll notice that there's closed captioning on the top of the screen. And so what we did is we varied the orientation of the weather forecaster and the ASL interpreter, left, right, top, bottom, overlay. As you can see that there is a scroll coming from the news station on the bottom. And so trying to get the captioning oriented to not overlap that. That was a complaint that that emerged in our interviews, that captioning oftentimes will overlay with information that's important on the screen. And so there's a lot of information coming through these emergency forecasts. And so trying to find ways to not overlay important information was sort of vital. And so this one, you'll see another example of this split screen, and it'll actually show Aaron Kuby in it, and he's shown in the right working with his team interpreter Richard Zabelski. They came to Tuscaloosa, and we worked in our digital media center and tried to create a situation where a deaf interpreter and an American Sign Language interpreter could work simultaneously. And we were simulating what it would look like to do ASL interpreting in real time. And as you could imagine, it's very challenging. There's a lot of technology involved, physical space. And so I wanted to pass it over to Aaron Kuby, and he can talk a little bit about his experience joining us in Tuscaloosa and doing some of that work.
Okay, is the spotlight on me? I'm not sure if we have it. Can everyone see me signing right now? Am I on the screen? This is Aaron. Am I on the screen?
This is Darren. Can the host pin Aaron?
Okay, there we go. Got it. Just wanted to make sure. Okay. There I can see myself, which I don't necessarily like, but we'll work with it. Okay, so thank you, Darren, for allowing me to be involved today and inviting me to join your project. Back in, I think, 2019, it was pre-COVID. So, you know, yeah, it was quite a challenge with all the filming in the media studio, like you mentioned. You know, I'm not as familiar with the Alabama city names, and I learned like the sign for Tuscaloosa, and others as well. And like your local sign for tornado, for example, I sign it differently. And so, you know, just learning about the regional signs there, and that there's, you know, actually like 6 or 7 different regional signs for the sign tornado throughout the United States. So I learned in Alabama, it is signed like I just did there. So as Darren had mentioned before, you know, when we get the, you know, video from the weather forecasters and they're talking about what's coming and where it's heading and whatnot, I wanted to, you know, when I'm up there and have the camera on me, they tend to be talking quickly, right? So I'm on camera and I have my hearing interpreter in front of me, and then I can also see what is being said. And so I have a lot of different inputs coming in of the information. And, you know, we need to know the concept of the warning. What is the main concepts of the messages that are trying to be relayed to the audience, and making sure it's in a way that the audience is going to understand the very specific information. And if the weather people are talking very quickly, it's sometimes hard to follow and listen to them. So I work with my hearing interpreter. And we also have previous disaster FEMA work together. So we know each other well and can work well as a team. So we do have our system in place of how to get the important information out. And we have, you know, different types of body language, and just like I said, a system that we use to communicate with each other and to work effectively as a team. And you know, if this right here in my hand is, for example, the state of Alabama, and we can use that to show direction of where the tornado is going, and it creates a visual picture of where things are headed, for example. You know, it was a very good experience for us to be a part of that. And I am interested to hear, you know, the rest of Darren's research and what the findings were, and that will help us here at FEMA about how we can better support the community going forward as well. So, I mean, with that, I'll pass it back over to you, Darren, for now, but let me know if you need anything else.
Thank you, Aaron. And maybe when Jennifer shows another image of you, you can chime in for vanity. I'm joking. thank you for joining us. And I wanted to pass it to Jason, and he can share some of the results of our interviews. Next slide.
Hello, this is Jason again. Thank you so much, Aaron, for coming on. I really enjoyed seeing you again. So I want to briefly cover our results and our recommendations. And we had 4 research questions. This is our first research question. I'm obviously not going to read all of these slides. What information sources do deaf, hard of hearing people use? How well is the information understood? So it's always important to assess where the information is coming from and how it is comprehended. So it's very similar to the hearing population, a variety of sources. That's weather apps, sometimes that's social media, and a lot of times it's TV weather. Now, it's a little bit less emphasis on TV weather. Darren talked about the captioning problems a few minutes ago, and that's annoying, and it clouds the comprehension of the information. So it's a constant issue, and it was mentioned several times by our participants. There's lots of specialized technology. I think Jennifer's going to talk a little bit about that at the end. She's got some slides on that. Information is generally well understood, no issues there, but there is a decision-making delay time. Can you imagine just watching a weather broadcast and then there's a delay in the information between what's on screen? It's a huge disadvantage. So it's really here, the recommendations, we're trying to figure out how to reduce the decision-making delay times, because 30 seconds could be critical, especially if it's a strong or violent tornado. Next slide, please. So our second research question, what influences tornado risk perception? No major differences here. It was interesting that in the interviews we had a lot of comments, and so there's some evidence to suggest that there is greater sensory perception. Looking more for environmental cues, we had a lot of comments about a green sky. A green sky is usually a hail sky. About how the wind moves, about the humidity. So maybe a little bit more sensory perception compared to the hearing population. We thought that was interesting. The recommendations are the same as they'll be on the next slide. So we'll just go to the next slide. I'll talk about those recommendations more on this slide. Protective action decisions. So what do you do? Where do you go when you get the tornado warning? Most people go to an interior room on the lowest floor. It's a hallway or it's a bathroom. Many of our participants talked about bringing a bike helmet or a football helmet and getting into the bathtub. And our local TV weather broadcasters are some of the best in the country, and they describe what you can do. But every tornado warning is perceived as the same level of risk. And we need to do more to educate people about the Storm Prediction Center, the convective outlooks. This is a 5-tier system, and it goes from especially enhanced, which is orange, moderate is red, and then high risk is that pinkish purple color. I don't see colors that well going back to Kathy's presentation. But we need to have more awareness about the levels of severe weather ahead of time before the outbreak begins, so that people know that, hey, maybe this is one of those special high-risk days where there's a good chance for violent tornadoes. And this is true for everybody in the country. We just need to get more awareness out about what the risk is for that particular day. Next slide, please. What modifications could be implemented to make warnings better in television and operational meteorology? Jennifer is about to talk about the operational part and what National Weather Service is doing. And they're developing outreach and educational programs. So she's going to talk about that. You'll see that a couple of times on this slide. Our focus group and our participants were so excited about the idea of a split screen format with an ASL interpreter. Our focus group, it was really fun. when we were interacting with our focus group and showing some of the different formats as Darren was describing, just to see their reactions. And it's just so crucial that we get something like this done. The feasibility of a TV station doing this. Well, we talked to some TV stations and there's lots of questions about that, but there needs to be a way for us to figure out how to get this done and make this available, so that we can have this technology to decrease the time lag that we were talking about. So I will now pass this over to Jennifer. She'll talk about National Weather Service. Thank you.
Again, thank you everyone for attending. The Weather Service, we've been trying to, over the past decade, develop and implement deaf and hard of hearing outreach, weather education across the country. And I wanted to give you a timeline of where we've started to how we progressed and where we are today. In 2012, we started deaf and hard of hearing weather education classes. Many of you may also know them as Skywarn classes, in the Tennessee Valley between Huntsville, Alabama and Nashville, Tennessee, as a joint effort. And we saw the success in that need and the response of wanting more, that we developed a deaf and hard of hearing outreach team for the National Weather Service. So other offices across the country would be able to get this outreach information and adapt it to their local area and do this for themselves. And we also work with those offices to inform them on how to build partnerships. I'll talk a little bit more about partnerships, but we can't do it without our deaf and hard of hearing partners. And there are different state and regional entities that you can connect with. Do not be afraid to pick up the phone and call someone. There are state agencies and like the Association of the Deaf, the Hearing Loss of America. Each state has a deaf and hard of hearing like focal point, if you will, a state coordinator. So contact them and see if they can reach you or direct you to your local partnership that you can build on. Do not wait for people to reach out to you. Reach out to them, and they may not know you exist or how you can help or what you can do. So just by picking up the phone call one day to the Alabama Rehabilitation Services, I was able to build partnerships with them and the Institute for the Deaf and Blind across Alabama. And we've been able to develop new materials and have each office that covers the state of Alabama have the ability to do deaf and hard of hearing outreach every year. So we also wanted to spread the education resources farther than what we could reach locally. So we encouraged the National Weather Service to celebrate National Deaf Awareness Week, and that is coming up later in September. So we'll take the international hashtags and we'll put that weather safety information in there to help spread it throughout the week. We also realized during our classes that the regular lightning safety information slogan, which is "When thunder roars, go indoors," did not help our deaf audiences. They asked us to make something new. So we worked with them and said, okay, well, what do you need? Like, what kind of slogan, what kind of logo would help you and show you what to do? So we came up with "See a flash, dash inside." I also had a local design artist help us finalize the logo, and we made sure with our partners that this was suitable. And I am happy to say that in 2016, both the National Weather Service and NOAA has accepted this as an additional safety outreach slogan and logo. So "See a flash, dash inside" materials can be found everywhere. From 2018 to present, we're still working on creating several weather safety public service announcements and numerous infographics. And we tried to make them more picture, less text, and with the videos, make sure we have captions that are good, and we have certified interpreters with us as well. In 2019, I got to work with Darren to work with the offices across the state of Alabama to research the use of weather radios with the deaf and hard of hearing population. This is something that I do every year is with my partners, and they're getting their funds to get weather radios to distribute to these classes. So Darren was able to hop right along with what we were already doing and do some research with that. And in 2021, I got to work with them again when our research that they talked about was published. And this was the first deaf-related publication in the Journal of Meteorology for NWA. And this was huge. And we were excited to talk about it with the Weather Enterprise and also with you here today. And it kind of sums up of, you know, what if what you see right now on TV for a severe weather event could look like the image on the right, where you have a certified deaf interpreter signing along with, not covering up anything, allowing room for those captions to also have area to be read and not cover anything. And then my group can speak more, but it was found that with the certified deaf interpreter on the left was more preferred than on the right, or being covered up in a smaller box that was not as readable. So that was a great finding that we were able to have. And if we could have interpreters on all of our severe weather events, it would really increase the understanding for this deaf community and help them. But we also wanted to make sure that now they have the information, but we wanted to ensure they know what to do with it and what to do afterwards. So that's when we have these weather education classes. And in 2022, I was part of a team for a NOAA Lantern project, and we really researched and presented to headquarters just a list of recommendations and requirements that the NWS should consider to help improve the communication access for those with limited English proficiency, including the deaf and hard of hearing. Our other half of the group was focused on Spanish, and so we wanted to bring up the hurdles and also provide those possible solutions in order to help increase, again, that communication access. So that's on a national scale. And on a regional scale, I'm also co-leading a team for all the offices that cover part of the state of Tennessee, which we do as well. We cover Southern Middle Tennessee. And we wanted to make a focus group on how to develop and implement outreach and education to vulnerable populations within our areas. So I know this is Spanish related, but we started with Spanish, and we created a weather safety page in English and Spanish. And this group will also be, again, during Deaf Awareness Week, sending out information graphics pertaining to the deaf and hard of hearing, and trying to utilize them during other hazardous events as well. And even on another national scale, with the weather conference coming up, the National Weather Association annual conference, I'm part of a group that we want to highlight what it's like not having your hearing during a severe weather event. So we have all the Weather Enterprise with us. And so we're running through a simulation of an overnight severe weather event where tornadoes did occur. And we're working with the Kansas Association of the Deaf to really bring their perspective to everyone of what that is like. And real quick on my workshops, I make sure that they're fully accessible. That's what's different about the regular Skywarn talks that the offices do every spring and fall. So I have my caption, and then I have my interpreter, and my presentation. I try to use more pictures and less text. And I try to include things that would help my group know what to do if there was no captions or bad captions, and what kind of safety things that they may need to think of to better suit them. But I'll say again that the external partnerships are absolutely necessary. Build those deaf partnerships, pick up the phone, call, and see how you can do something, a project or an outreach event, or just sit down at the table and have a round table discussion of how we could help each other. EMA partnerships, I make sure at my classes, I have the county and surrounding county emergency managers there with me. This is the time for you to talk to a group that you may not have had good access to before. And this is the time for them to ask you questions that they've always wanted to ask, but never had the opportunity or didn't know who to ask. A lot of times it's about shelters and, the emergency alerts, like the reverse 911s that they get through the local EMA. And I also invite the local media. There are questions about captions that I can't handle because I'm not on TV. But also, how can the media find little ways that they can help out this group, this community, and also, make sure like they're reaching out to them as well during their own outreach events. I, have to find the communication services, which my partners have been amazing to provide me, but that's not going to be the case for everywhere. So you have to look at your own funding and figure out, if we're going to do this, we need to make sure we have this fully accessible. So work with those partners to find out who you can contact to get those services. Advertisements, I usually make a flyer about the class and I have my partners distribute it, my emergency managers. We post it on the National Weather Service social media accounts. And I bring different handouts that people can leave the class with, and also work with my partners to find a venue. And my partners have been amazing to help us provide weather radios with strobe light and shaker attachments over the years. So they not only come to class and get an education, but they have one more way in their pocket to have a way to receive a warning and know I need to seek additional information. And then they know what to do for safety protocols on how to do that. This is just one slide that I include that's focused towards this group of my emergency kit is going to look different than yours. But a few things that you can include to help you is different ways to communicate. And especially with those first responders, you want to make sure that you're prepared. And then having the first responders also know, how do I get communication access to help this individual after a disaster? That's also important. And one thing I didn't think of is like a lantern for some people that lip read or that you need to see the sign. Cell phone chargers that are solar that don't always need to like have the batteries changed. So just different ways that I can help this group be as prepared as possible. And again, there's a couple different manufacturers that make attachments for weather radios. Midland is one of them. And their set of the shaker and light will work with any weather radio that says public alert. And so I have an example of an infographic that we'll send out during Deaf Awareness Week, just letting people know these attachments. I try to tell everyone about them because not everyone's aware that they exist. So I encourage the emergency management agency and the media to also have these at your outreach tables. Let people know they exist and where they can find them. We also have a video in ASL and captions about how you can program your weather radio, or you can call a weather service office anytime for us to help you walk through how to program it. And there's just an important key to have one more way to help you get notified, especially in the middle of the night and in the Southeast here, to get that warning. And if you are interested in participating, get your information out there that you exist and how you can help the community. Push that weather information out during this International Week of the Deaf, Deaf Awareness Week. This runs from September 18th to 24th. And these are some common hashtags you can feel free to utilize as well in order to get your information in there and as widespread as possible. And I'll also quickly note that we have the public service announcements that are captioned and have ASL on a web page for Weather Ready Nation. And you can find all of those there and a bunch of infographics as well. So you have the link and the QR code there. And so we try to have everything as a one-stop shop for you to be able to utilize this information throughout the entire year. And I will pass it back to my group for any final wrap-ups and thank yous.
Hey, this is Kyle. I think that we have some time for some Q&A. If you have questions for any of our panelists, feel free to put that in the Q&A box, and I can either read it out to them or I'll send it to one of them and have them answer it.
This is Darren. I see a question about the organization of ASL services, interpreting services. And I think that's an important thing to think about if we try to realize how emergency communication would take place. And that's something that we did during our project. Working with different enterprises and entities, interpreting services, agencies that have staff interpreters to actually understand what it would look like to deploy interpreter services during an emergency. And I think one of the things that has changed dramatically since we did our research is the advent of webinars and Zoom technology. When we were originally doing this research, the idea of having interpreters jump on a webinar in real time didn't really exist. And I think the pandemic, one of the positives of the pandemic has increased some accessibility for people in situations where Zoom or other webinar platforms can be utilized in real time. So I saw in the chat earlier, Dan Keller and DeafLink are utilizing technology and social media and different forms to do some of that stuff. And so folks can look at the link that he sent out in the Q&A to understand how they're facilitating interpreters in real time. But it's an interesting question and certainly a big challenge.
Hey, this is Kyle again. For our panelists, there was a question: does National Weather Service get funding for the radios with attachments?
This is Jennifer. The National Weather Service, we have worked with our deaf partners and across the states, and they have worked with the health departments and the Red Cross or other grant money that they've received. And they're the ones that get that money, make those purchases, and then they schedule a weather education class with us, and then that's where they can distribute them and we can help program those weather radios. So we do not deal with any of the weather radio obtaining and purchasing. We just do the education, the outreach, and the programming for them.
This is Darren. I wanted to add on to that a little bit and thank the folks at Midland. When we have reached out to them about some of these workshops, they've actually donated and funded some of the radios They have given some of them to us at cost, and I've utilized research funding from the project that we're presenting on today and other research support at the University of Alabama. And I would say that, having deaf parents and being a member of the deaf community myself, the weather radios are truly a good step as a basic step to getting real-time information. There's multiple companies that make them, but Midland is one of them that has a text-based radio. And for a deaf person in real time, when those alerts go out, to see that it's a watch or a warning is vital to getting that information when other sources of technology like the internet or TV might be down. So very accessible. You can buy them on the internet. Obviously, I know that, locally stores like Academy will carry them. And so they're a good step in accessibility for the deaf community.
Jason, I think this next question is for you. It says, I was really interested in what Jason said about the decision-making delay. Was this due to the crawl being slower than the spoken presentation by the broadcaster, or another reason?
It's both. Yes, it is slower, and those participants on here right now who are deaf can tell you how slow it is. It's also filled with errors. Because as Darren was saying, the ASL and English one-to-one translation is not perfect. So those are the two main reasons, but we need a deaf participant to answer that question and tell you exactly how bad it is.
Hey, this is Kyle again. There's another question. What devices are recommended for weather radios for alerting deaf people, flashing lights, vibrating alerts, etc.?
This is Darren. Jennifer, do you want to speak to this?
I can speak. This is Jennifer. The weather radio itself, make sure it's working. It always has, every time you change your smoke detector batteries each season, go ahead and change those as well. And like I said, there's more than one company, but Midland is the one I'm most familiar with that makes the strobe lights attachments and the pillow shakers. Also look into buying the Y cord attachment so you can attach both of them, because there's only one output button or option in the back. So just make sure you buy which is going to suit your needs, and get that attachment so you can use both of them if you need that. And like we said, it's always great to have this as just one of many tools that you need to have a way to receive a watch and warning.
This is Darren. I wanted to add a little bit. I learned actually something that I thought was a nice life pro tip from the folks at Midland Radio when they were working with us. They actually donated some batteries, which batteries can get rather expensive when you're doing a budget for an event and you're buying radios and strobe lights and bed shakers. Sometimes you forget about the batteries and that can rack up. And so they helped out there, and they told me that using lithium batteries is an important thing to do in devices like this, because they won't leak acid and ruin the device over time, and they're longer lasting. So just a personal pro tip for these devices or anything else is something that's going to sit and needs to be accessible, considering lithium batteries. We did learn, and Jennifer knows this, and Jason and I learned it, that there's some red strobe lights that plug into these weather radios, and there's white strobe lights. And we learned that the white strobe lights were sought after because of the way that they cast a shadow differently just based on the wavelength of the lights. I'm a communication scientist, so I won't get into all of that, but I learned quickly that a red strobe flashing in a bedroom won't project outside of that room as well as a bright white strobe. And I believe Midland has now made a white strobe that's battery powered. Before we were having to rely on electricity, and the strobe itself was very expensive, probably 2 to 3 times more expensive than the radio. So we've come a long way there. I've seen a couple of comments in the Q&A about captioning and closed captioning. We've talked about the language differences. Another thing to think about is there's published statistics and how accurate they are. There's probably a lot of discrepancy, like with any community or group of people. There's no one stereotype of a person, but in the deaf community, people vary greatly in their additional disabilities and their skills. But there's published research out there that says that the average reading level of a deaf high school graduate is around 4th or 5th grade. And so thinking about captionings that are going really fast in English, it becomes a reading comprehension issue. And so using American Sign Language to provide communication in the deaf community tends to be better.
Hey, this is Kyle again. I know we still have a lot of questions or a few questions, but we are about out of time. I have 1 minute to 2 o'clock. I guess do we have panelists? Do we have time for one more question? Do you guys mind? All right, I'll give you one more. Is it because I think it's kind of important as well. Is there a list of resources out there that local emergency management offices could give to our local community members on these types of alerting devices?
This is Jennifer. I will say that on the Weather Ready Nation website, where we have our deaf page, you have those videos, and then during Deaf Awareness Week, monitor the social media. We'll be putting out information about these weather radio attachments, like the slide that I showed earlier. Grab those, save those off. I don't know if there's a info slide like that on our deaf page, but reach out to me if you want, or just watch the National Weather Service Huntsville, Alabama social media stuff during Deaf Awareness Week, and I will give you everything you want, and you can save it off. I make sure they don't have any dates, so you can use them again.
Hey, this is Kyle again. It is 2 o'clock. In the interest of everyone's time, I don't want to steal any more of our panelists' time today. We'd like to thank everybody that attended today. Thank you to our panelists and all of our interpreters and our partners over with Alabama Mississippi Sea Grant Consortium. I think that's all we have for you today. Our next webinar will be in November. I believe it'll be on sheltering and during tornadoes and severe weather events. So be on the lookout for that that invite as well. Thank you again. Feel free to drop.